The fluorescent lights of the university library cast harsh shadows across the mahogany tables, but in the far corner of the third floor, where dusty philosophy books created a natural barrier from prying eyes, Dr. Sarah Chen felt safer than anywhere else in the world. Her fingers trembled slightly as she turned the pages of Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil, not because of the complex German philosophy, but because she knew that in exactly 7 minutes, her world would shift on its axis once again. The sound of heels clicking against the polished floor made her heart race. She didn't need to look up to know it was Elena Rodriguez approaching. She had memorized that particular rhythm months ago. The way Elena's left foot landed just a fraction of a second longer than her right. The confident stride that spoke of someone who owned every room she entered. The subtle pause she always made 3 steps before reaching Sarah's table. "Professor Chen." Elena's voice was carefully modulated, professional, carrying just the right amount of academic deference that any observer would expect from a graduate student addressing her thesis advisor. But Sarah caught the barely perceptible breathiness, the way Elena's tongue lingered on the N in Chen, and her stomach clenched with a familiar mixture of desire and terror. "Miss Rodriguez," Sarah replied, finally lifting her eyes from the book. Elena stood before her in a navy blazer and cream-colored blouse, her dark hair pulled back in a professional bun that couldn't quite contain the rebellious curls that framed her face. Those brown eyes, flecked with gold that seemed to catch fire under the library's lights, held Sarah's gaze for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to communicate everything they couldn't say aloud, short enough to maintain the facade. Elena pulled out the chair across from Sarah, the metal legs scraping softly against the floor. She placed her leather messenger bag on the table with practiced precision, then withdrew a manila folder thick with research papers. To anyone watching, this was simply another advisory meeting between professor and student. Sarah had become an expert at reading the subtext of their public interactions. "I've made significant progress on the Foucault analysis you suggested," Elena said, opening the folder. Her fingers, adorned with a simple silver ring on her right hand, the one Sarah had given her on a rain-soaked evening 2 months ago, brushed against Sarah's as she passed over the papers. The contact lasted mere seconds, but it sent electricity up Sarah's arm. Sarah forced herself to focus on the typed pages, though the words blurred slightly. Elena's thesis on power dynamics in contemporary American literature was brilliant, but right now, Sarah was more concerned with the very real power dynamics playing out in their own lives. She was 34, a tenured professor with a reputation to protect. Elena was 26, a graduate student whose academic future hung in the balance. The university's strict policies on professor-student relationships weren't just guidelines, they were career-ending prohibitions. "Your interpretation of the panopticon concept is particularly insightful," Sarah managed to say, her voice steady despite the chaos in her chest. "But I think you could push the analysis further. What about the way surveillance creates self-censorship?" The irony wasn't lost on either of them. They were living embodiments of self-censorship, constantly watching themselves, moderating their behavior, creating distance where they craved closeness. Elena's eyes flickered with understanding, and the corner of her mouth twitched in what might have been a smile if they were anywhere else. "Self-censorship," Elena repeated thoughtfully, leaning forward slightly. "The way people modify their behavior when they know, or think, they're being watched, even when no one is actually observing them." "Exactly," Sarah said, and their eyes met again. This time, neither looked away immediately. In that suspended moment, Sarah could see everything Elena wasn't saying: the frustration of stolen glances across lecture halls, the agony of maintaining professional distance when all she wanted was to reach out and touch, the careful choreography of their secret meetings. A group of undergraduate students chose that moment to settle at a nearby table, their voices cutting through the intimate atmosphere like a blade. Sarah and Elena immediately shifted into their public roles, Elena straightening in her chair, Sarah adopting the slightly stern expression she wore during office hours. "I'll need you to revise this section," Sarah said, pointing to a paragraph on page 3. As she did, she wrote something quickly in the margin, not academic feedback, but an address: 1247 Maple Street, apartment 3B. It was her address, written in handwriting small enough that only Elena would see it. Below that, she wrote, "Tonight, 9 p.m. Elena's breathing quickened almost imperceptibly. She nodded, sliding the paper back into her folder. "Of course, Professor. I'll make those revisions and have them ready for our next meeting." The word meeting carried weight between them. Their next meeting wouldn't be in this sterile library or Sarah's cramped office. It would be in Sarah's apartment, where they could drop the pretense, where Elena could call her by her first name, where they could exist as simply Sarah and Elena, rather than professor and student. "I should go," Elena said, glancing at her watch. "I have Dr. Martinez's seminar in 20 minutes. As she stood and gathered her materials, her hand briefly touched Sarah's shoulder, a gesture that could be interpreted as respectful gratitude, but Sarah felt the weight of longing in those fingers. Elena walked away without looking back, her heels clicking that familiar rhythm across the library floor. Sarah remained at the table for another 10 minutes, staring at the Nietzsche text but seeing none of it. The weight of their secret felt heavier each day, like a stone growing in her chest. She thought about her colleague, Dr. Peterson, who had been fired 3 years ago for a relationship with a graduate student. She thought about Elena's dreams of pursuing a PhD at Columbia, dreams that could crumble if their relationship became public knowledge. But she also thought about the way Elena laughed when they were alone together, unguarded and genuine. She thought about the conversations that lasted until dawn, Elena's head on her shoulder as they debated literature and philosophy and life. She thought about the way Elena looked at her like she was the most fascinating person in the world, not because of her position or her degrees, but simply because of who she was. As Sarah finally packed up her books and headed toward the library's exit, she couldn't shake the feeling that their carefully constructed world was becoming increasingly fragile. The glances were lasting longer, the casual touches becoming more frequent, the line between public and private blurring in dangerous ways. Tonight, in the safety of her apartment, they would have a few hours to be themselves. But tomorrow, they would return to this elaborate performance, and Sarah wondered how much longer they could sustain it before something, or someone, shattered the illusion completely. The autumn air was crisp as she stepped outside, and somewhere across campus, Elena was probably sitting in Dr. Martinez's seminar, taking notes and participating in discussions while her mind replayed their encounter in the library. Sarah pulled her coat tighter around herself and walked toward her car, carrying with her the anticipation of evening and the ever-present fear of discovery. The soft knock on Sarah's apartment door came at exactly 9 o'clock. Elena had always been punctual, but in the past few months, her timing had become almost ritualistic, arriving neither early enough to seem eager nor late enough to suggest reluctance. It was another layer of protection in their carefully orchestrated secret. Sarah opened the door to find Elena transformed from the professional graduate student she'd been in the library. Gone was the blazer and formal blouse, replaced by dark jeans and a soft burgundy sweater that brought out the warm tones in her skin. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders, no longer constrained by academic propriety. "Hi," Elena said simply, and that single word carried all the warmth and intimacy that had been forbidden between them hours earlier. "Hi yourself," Sarah replied, stepping aside to let her in. As Elena passed, Sarah caught the familiar scent of her perfume, something light and citrusy that had become associated with stolen moments and whispered conversations. The apartment was Sarah's sanctuary, far removed from the university's Gothic architecture and institutional constraints. Warm lighting cast a golden glow over shelves lined with books, comfortable furniture that invited lingering, and walls adorned with art Elena had helped her select during weekend antiquing trips to small towns outside the city. This was their real world, where titles and hierarchies dissolved. Elena settled onto the familiar corner of the couch, tucking her legs beneath her in a gesture so natural it made Sarah's chest ache with affection. This was how Elena always sat during their evenings together. Not the rigid posture she maintained in classrooms, but relaxed, unguarded, genuinely herself. "How was Martinez's seminar?" Sarah asked, pouring 2 glasses of wine from the bottle she'd opened an hour ago, needing something to calm her nerves. "Exhausting," Elena sighed, accepting the glass. "We spent 40 minutes debating whether postmodern literature is inherently political. Johnson kept insisting that art exists in a vacuum, completely separate from social context. I wanted to throw my copy of Morrison at his head. Sarah laughed, settling beside Elena on the couch, close enough to feel her warmth but not quite touching. Even here, in private, they maintained invisible boundaries, as if the university's watchful eyes could penetrate these walls. Morrison would definitely approve of being used as a weapon against willful ignorance, Sarah said. What did you argue? That claiming art exists without political context is itself a political position, Elena replied, taking a sip of wine. Usually one held by people privileged enough to believe their perspective is universal. Sarah felt that familiar surge of intellectual attraction that had first drawn her to Elena. It wasn't just Elena's beauty, though that was undeniable. It was her mind, sharp, insightful, unafraid to challenge conventional wisdom. In faculty meetings, Sarah often found herself thinking about arguments Elena had made during their private conversations, perspectives that cut through academic pretense to reach something real and vital. You should publish that argument, Sarah said. It's exactly the kind of thinking that challenges people to examine their assumptions. Elena smiled, but there was something wistful in her expression. Maybe someday. When I'm Dr. Rodriguez instead of just a graduate student whose ideas are easily dismissed. The comment hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Elena's academic future was one of the many complications that made their relationship feel both precious and precarious. Sarah wanted to champion Elena's work, to recommend her for conferences and publications, to help open doors that might otherwise remain closed. But any special attention could raise questions, create suspicions that would endanger them both. You know I believe in your work, Sarah said carefully. Your thesis is going to be exceptional. I know, Elena replied, and there was gratitude in her voice along with something deeper. The unspoken acknowledgement that Sarah's support came with limitations, boundaries that academic politics demanded. They fell into comfortable silence, the kind that had become natural between them. Elena's hand rested on the couch cushion, palm up, and Sarah found herself staring at it. The silver ring catching the lamplight, the delicate lines of her fingers, the pale scar near her thumb from a childhood accident Elena had described during one of their late-night conversations. I've been thinking about what you said today, Elena said quietly, about self-censorship and surveillance. Oh? We're living it, aren't we? Elena's voice was barely above a whisper. Even when we're alone like this, we're still performing, still watching ourselves, editing our behavior. Sarah's throat tightened. Elena was right. Even here, they held back. Their touches were brief, their physical affection carefully rationed. They'd never even said the word love aloud, though it hung between them like a visible presence. Elena, Sarah began, but found herself unable to finish the thought. I know, Elena said. I know all the reasons. Your career, my future, the power dynamics, university policy. I understand the logic. But sometimes I wonder if we're so afraid of being discovered that we're not even allowing ourselves to exist. Sarah reached out, finally closing the distance between them. Her fingers intertwined with Elena's, and she felt Elena's slight intake of breath at the contact. Such a simple gesture, but it carried the weight of everything they couldn't openly acknowledge. What we have is real, Sarah said finally, even if we can't always show it. Is it enough? Elena asked, and the vulnerability in her voice made Sarah's heart clench. Living in fragments, stolen hours, pretending we're strangers in public? Sarah wanted to say yes, wanted to insist that what they shared in these private moments was worth any sacrifice. But lately, she'd been asking herself the same question. The constant vigilance was exhausting. The weight of deception grew heavier each day. And watching Elena dim herself in public, hide her brilliance behind appropriate deference, was becoming increasingly painful. I don't know, Sarah admitted, and the honesty felt both liberating and terrifying. Elena squeezed her hand, then shifted closer on the couch. For once, she didn't maintain the careful distance they usually preserved. She leaned into Sarah, her head finding its familiar place on Sarah's shoulder, and Sarah's arm came around her automatically. Dr. Peterson called me yesterday, Elena said quietly. Sarah's body tensed, Peterson, the colleague who'd been fired for his relationship with a graduate student, was now teaching at a community college 2 states away. His career never recovered from the scandal. What did he want? He'd heard through academic gossip that I was one of your advisees. He wanted to warn me about getting too close to faculty members. Said the university would destroy both of us if they suspected anything inappropriate. Sarah's blood chilled. Did he seem to know? No, Elena said quickly. I think he was just being cautious. But Sarah, if he's heard enough to reach out, how long before others start paying attention? The question settled over them like a shadow. They both knew their secret was becoming harder to maintain. The casual touches in the library, the way they looked at each other during faculty events, the frequency of their academic meetings, patterns that observant colleagues might begin to notice. Maybe we should be more careful, Sarah said, hating the words as she spoke them. More careful than we already are. Elena pulled back to look at her. Sarah, we barely acknowledge each other exists in public. How much more careful can we be without disappearing entirely? They stared at each other in the warm lamplight, both thinking the same thing neither wanted to voice. Maybe disappearing was the only safe option. Maybe the smart thing would be to end this before it destroyed them both. But as Sarah looked into Elena's eyes that knew her better than anyone ever had, eyes that saw past her professional facade to the woman underneath, she knew she wasn't strong enough to walk away. Not yet. Let's not think about it tonight, Sarah said finally. Let's just be here, right now. Elena nodded, settling back against Sarah's shoulder. They sat in silence, holding each other in the safety of Sarah's apartment, while the world outside continued its dangerous orbit around them, unaware that 2 hearts were breaking slowly, carefully, in the space between what they wanted and what they could have. 3 weeks later, the first crack appeared in their carefully constructed world during what should have been an ordinary Tuesday faculty meeting. Sarah sat in the polished conference room, half listening to Dr. Williams drone about budget allocations, when Department Head Professor Margaret Stone's voice cut through her distraction like a blade. We need to discuss recent observations regarding student-faculty interactions, Stone announced, her steel-gray eyes scanning the room. There have been concerns raised about appropriate boundaries. Sarah's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. Across the table, Dr. Martinez shifted uncomfortably, and she wondered if he was thinking about his own harmless but frequent conversations with undergraduate students. The room fell silent except for the aggressive hum of the overhead fluorescent lights. Nothing specific, Stone continued, but we all know what happened with Dr. Peterson. We cannot afford another scandal. I want everyone to review university policy regarding professional relationships and ensure they're maintaining appropriate distance with students. Sarah forced herself to nod along with her colleagues, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. She caught Dr. Henderson's meaningful glance toward the younger professors, Sarah included, and realized this warning wasn't as general as Stone pretended. After the meeting, Sarah remained in her office with the door closed, staring at Elena's thesis draft on her computer screen without seeing the words. The knock she'd been expecting came 20 minutes later. "Come in," she called, knowing it would be Elena. She always stopped by after Sarah's faculty meetings, a routine they'd established to share information that might affect Elena's academic progress. Elena entered with her usual professional composure, but Sarah caught the tension in her shoulders, the way her grip on her bag was slightly too tight. "How was the meeting?" Elena asked, settling into the chair across from Sarah's desk, the same chair she'd occupied dozens of times as they discussed her research, their relationship always hiding in plain sight behind academic discourse. "Routine budget discussions," Sarah lied smoothly, then added more quietly, "some general reminders about university policies." Elena's face remained neutral, but Sarah saw the flash of understanding in her eyes. They'd both become expert at reading between lines, communicating in code, finding meaning in the spaces between words. "I see," Elena said. "Anything that might affect my timeline for completing the thesis?" It was a fair question on the surface, but Sarah heard what Elena was really asking. "Are we in danger? Should we be more careful? Are they watching us?" "No changes to academic timelines," Sarah replied, meeting Elena's gaze directly. "Though all students should be mindful of maintaining appropriate professional relationships." Elena nodded, her expression giving nothing away. To any observer, this would appear to be nothing more than an advisor giving standard guidance to a graduate student. But Sarah could see the slight tightening around Elena's eyes, the way her breathing had become more controlled. Of course, Professor Chen. I've always been committed to maintaining the highest professional standards. The formality of Elena's response felt like a small death. Even in private moments like this, they were retreating further into their roles, the walls between them growing higher and thicker. After Elena left, Sarah found herself unable to concentrate on grading or research. She walked to her office window and stared out at the campus quad, watching students cross the brick pathways between classes. Somewhere among them was Elena, probably heading to her contemporary American literature seminar, carrying the weight of their secret like a stone in her chest. That evening, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Can we meet tonight? I need to talk to you." Sarah's stomach clenched. In all their months together, Elena had never requested an unscheduled meeting. Their careful routine of planned encounters was part of their protection, another layer of deniability if questions arose. She typed back, "My place, 8 p.m. Elena arrived early, pacing Sarah's small living room like a caged animal. Her usual composure had cracked, revealing the anxiety she'd been hiding all day. "I think Jennifer Martinez knows," Elena said without preamble. Sarah's blood turned cold. Jennifer Martinez was a fellow graduate student, sharp and ambitious, the kind of person who noticed everything and forgot nothing. "What makes you think that?" "Today after class, she made a comment about how often I visit your office compared to other students. She said it with a smile, but there was something underneath it." Elena ran her hands through her hair, destroying the professional bun she'd worn all day. "And last week, when we were in the library together, just for actual work, I caught her watching us from across the room." Sarah sank onto the couch, feeling the walls closing in. Jennifer Martinez had always been competitive, always looking for advantages or weaknesses in her peers. If she suspected something, it was only a matter of time before rumors started spreading. "Maybe she's just being observant," Sarah said, not believing it herself. "Sarah, you know better than that." Elena stopped pacing and turned to face her. "Academic departments are like small towns. People notice patterns, especially when those patterns involve their competition." The word competition stung because it was true. Elena and Jennifer were both top students, both vying for the same limited opportunities for conference presentations, research grants, PhD program recommendations. If Jennifer thought Elena was gaining unfair advantages through a personal relationship with faculty, she'd have every incentive to expose them. "What do we do?" Sarah asked, hating how helpless she sounded. Elena was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the darkening sky. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, but hollow. "We could stop. End this before it destroys both our careers." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Sarah had known this conversation would come eventually, had been dreading it even as she knew it was inevitable. But hearing Elena say it aloud made it real in a way that terrified her. "Is that what you want?" Sarah asked. Elena's laugh was bitter. "Of course it's not what I want. But Sarah, look at what we've become. We're paranoid, constantly watching over our shoulders, analyzing every interaction for hidden meanings. We can't even touch each other without checking who might be watching." She was right, and Sarah knew it. Their love had become a source of constant anxiety rather than joy. They were living in a prison of their own making, and the walls were closing in daily. "But if we stop," Sarah began, then trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "If we stop, I finish my thesis, graduate, hopefully get accepted to a PhD program somewhere far from here. You continue building your career without the shadow of scandal hanging over your head. We both survive." "Survive?" Sarah repeated. The word tasted like ash in her mouth. Elena moved to sit beside her on the couch, close enough to touch, but maintaining that careful distance that had become second nature to them both. "I love you," Elena said quietly, and it was the first time either of them had spoken those words aloud. "I love you enough to let you go before we destroy each other." Sarah felt tears burning behind her eyes. Elena was offering her an escape, a way to preserve everything they'd both worked so hard to build. It was the logical choice, the smart choice, the choice that would protect them both from the kind of scandal that could end careers and shatter dreams. "I love you too," Sarah whispered, and saying the words felt both like a gift and a goodbye. They sat in silence for a long time, holding hands in the lamplight, both knowing that loving each other might not be enough to overcome the forces aligned against them. The weight of their secret had become unbearable, but the thought of living without it, without each other, felt impossible. Outside, the university campus settled into evening quiet, unaware that two hearts were breaking in a small apartment where love had become both salvation and curse, where the very thing that made them feel most alive was slowly destroying everything they'd worked to build. "We don't have to decide tonight," Sarah said finally, though they both knew the decision had already been made. They were just too afraid to speak it into existence. Elena squeezed her hand, and in that touch, Sarah felt all the conversations they'd never have, all the moments they'd never share, all the life they'd never build together dissolving like sugar in rain. The foundation of their secret world was cracking, and they both knew it was only a matter of time before it crumbled completely. The end began with a photograph. Sarah discovered it tucked under her office door on a Thursday morning in November, when the first snow of the season was dusting the campus in white. She almost stepped on it, assuming it was a student's assignment that had been slipped under her door after hours. But when she bent to pick it up, her world tilted on its axis. The image was grainy, clearly taken from a distance with a phone camera, but the subjects were unmistakable. Sarah and Elena sat on a bench in Riverside Park, a small green space 20 minutes from campus where they'd thought they were safe from prying eyes. In the photo, Elena's head rested on Sarah's shoulder while Sarah's arm circled her waist. Their body language spoke of intimacy that no amount of professional explanation could justify. Sarah's hands shook as she turned the photo over. On the back, someone had written in block letters, "Interesting mentoring techniques." She sank into her desk chair, staring at the image that could destroy both their careers. The photo had been taken 3 weeks ago during one of their rare public outings, a Saturday afternoon when they'd driven to a part of town where they'd never seen anyone from the university. Elena had been stressed about her thesis defense timeline, and Sarah had suggested the small park as a place where Elena could talk through her anxieties without fear of being overheard. They had been careful, or so they'd thought. They'd checked the park when they arrived, noting only an elderly man walking his dog and a young mother pushing a stroller. But someone else had been there, someone with a camera and the patience to wait for the perfect moment. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Are you free for our usual meeting this afternoon?" Their usual meeting was scheduled for today at 2 p.m. in Sarah's office, ostensibly to discuss Elena's latest chapter revisions. But now, Sarah stared at the photograph and wondered if walking into that meeting would be walking into a trap. She typed back, "Can we reschedule? Something's come up." The response came immediately. "Is everything okay?" Sarah started to type yes, then deleted it. Nothing was okay. Nothing might ever be okay again. "We need to talk, not at the office. Can you come to my apartment tonight?" "Of course. What time?" 8 p.m. And Elena, be careful coming over. Make sure no one sees you. She could almost feel Elena's confusion through the phone, but there was no safe way to explain over text. Sarah spent the rest of the day in a haze of paranoia, jumping every time someone knocked on her door, analyzing every colleague's greeting for hidden meaning. She canceled her afternoon classes, claiming illness, and spent hours staring at the photograph, trying to figure out who could have taken it and what they wanted. Elena arrived at Sarah's apartment that evening with worry written across her face. She took one look at Sarah's expression and knew immediately that something was terribly wrong. "What happened?" she asked, not even bothering with their usual greetings. Sarah handed her the photograph without saying a word. Elena's face went white as she studied the image. Her fingers traced the edge of the photo, and Sarah watched her expression shift from confusion to understanding to fear. "Where did you find this?" Elena's voice was barely audible. "Under my office door this morning." Elena sank onto the couch, still clutching the photograph. "Who would... Jennifer?" "I don't know. Maybe. Or someone else who's been watching us." Sarah sat beside her, close enough to offer comfort but not quite touching. Even here, in private, the photograph had created new distance between them. "What do they want?" Elena asked. "I have no idea. There was no note, no demands. Just the photo and that message on the back. Elena flipped the photo over, reading the cruel words again. "Interesting mentoring techniques," she repeated bitterly. God, we were so stupid. We actually thought we could hide in plain sight. We weren't stupid, Sarah said firmly. We were in love. People in love take risks. Were. Elena caught the past tense, and her eyes filled with tears. Sarah realized her slip and felt her heart break a little more. Are in love. We are in love. But Elena, this changes everything. I know. Elena set the photograph on the coffee table, face down, as if not seeing it could make it disappear. What do we do now? Sarah had been asking herself the same question all day. We could go to Professor Stone first, explain the situation before whoever took this has a chance to use it, and destroy both our careers voluntarily, or we could wait and see what they want. Maybe it's just someone trying to scare us. Elena shook her head. Nobody takes a photo like this just to scare people. They want something, money, favors, or just the satisfaction of watching us squirm. They sat in silence, both contemplating their impossible situation. Coming forward would mean the end of Sarah's tenure track position and Elena's academic future. But waiting for their blackmailer to reveal themselves felt like slow torture. There's another option, Elena said quietly. Sarah looked at her, seeing the resignation in her eyes. I could transfer, finish my thesis under a different advisor, maybe at a different school entirely. If we're not working together anymore, if we don't see each other, you'd give up everything you've worked for here? I'd give up everything to protect you, Elena said simply. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Elena was willing to sacrifice her academic progress, her relationships with faculty who knew and respected her work, her entire support system, all to keep Sarah safe from scandal. I can't let you do that, Sarah whispered. It's not your choice, Elena replied. Sarah, you have tenure, you have a career, a future here. I'm just a graduate student. I'm replaceable. Not to me. Never to me. Elena smiled sadly. That's exactly why I have to go. They spent the next hour creating elaborate plans they both knew they'd never implement, moving to different cities where no one knew them, finding new careers where they could be together openly, running away to places where academic scandal couldn't follow. But as the evening wore on, reality settled over them like a heavy blanket. I should go, Elena said finally, though neither of them moved from the couch. I know. This might be the last time we can do this. Be alone together without it being dangerous for both of us. Sarah felt tears burning behind her eyes. Elena was right. Everything had changed. Even if they figured out who had taken the photograph, even if they managed to contain the immediate threat, they could never go back to stolen moments and secret meetings. The illusion of safety had been shattered. Elena, Sarah began, then stopped. There were so many things she wanted to say, but none of them would change their situation. I know, Elena said again, and leaned over to kiss Sarah's forehead, a gesture so tender and final that Sarah felt her heart breaking in real time. As Elena gathered her things to leave, she paused at the door. The last thing I want you to know, she said, her hand on the doorknob but not yet turning it, is that every moment we had together was worth it. Even knowing how it ends, I wouldn't change anything. Sarah wanted to respond, wanted to find words that could somehow make this moment less like goodbye. But Elena was already opening the door, already stepping back into the world where they had to pretend they were strangers. After Elena left, Sarah sat alone in her apartment, holding the photograph that had destroyed their carefully constructed world. Outside, the first snow continued to fall, covering the campus in pristine white that would be dirty and trampled by morning. Tomorrow she would have to face her colleagues, her students, Elena herself, and pretend that her heart hadn't been carved out of her chest. The point of no return hadn't been dramatic or sudden. It had been as quiet and devastating as a photograph slipped under a door, proof that love, no matter how carefully hidden, always finds a way to reveal itself to those who know how to look. The confrontation came 2 weeks later, on a Friday afternoon when the December wind howled across campus and most students had already left for winter break. Sarah was packing up her office, trying to decide which books to take home, when Professor Stone knocked on her doorframe. "Do you have a moment, Sarah?" Stone's voice carried a formality that made Sarah's stomach clench. "Of course." Sarah gestured to the chair across from her desk, the same chair Elena had occupied countless times over the past year. Stone closed the door behind her and sat down, placing a manila envelope on Sarah's desk. Sarah didn't need to open it to know what it contained. She recognized the cruel efficiency of academic bureaucracy when she saw it. "I received some disturbing photographs in my mailbox yesterday," Stone said without preamble, "along with a letter detailing concerns about your relationship with Ms. Rodriguez." Sarah's mouth went dry. The moment she'd been dreading for months had finally arrived, but somehow she felt oddly calm. The waiting was over. The pretending could stop. "I see," she managed to say. Stone's expression wasn't cruel exactly, but it was implacable. She'd been department head for 15 years and had navigated scandals before. "I'm going to be direct, Sarah. The photographs are quite clear, and the timeline of your interactions with Ms. Rodriguez raises serious questions about appropriate faculty-student boundaries." Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. "I've spoken with the dean, and we're prepared to offer you a choice," Stone continued. "You can resign your position effective at the end of this academic year, with a neutral letter of recommendation that makes no mention of these allegations. Or, we can proceed with a formal investigation, which will become part of the public record, and will likely result in termination for cause." The offer was more generous than Sarah had expected, and she understood why. The university wanted this to disappear quietly, without the kind of scandal that could damage their reputation or result in media attention. "What about Elena?" Sarah asked. Stone's expression softened slightly. "Ms. Rodriguez will be allowed to complete her thesis under a different advisor. Her academic standing won't be affected, assuming she maintains appropriate professional boundaries going forward." Sarah felt a wave of relief so intense it made her dizzy. Elena would be safe. Her academic future wouldn't be destroyed by their relationship. "I need time to consider your offer," Sarah said. "Of course, but I'll need an answer by Monday morning." After Stone left, Sarah sat alone in her office, surrounded by the books and papers that represented 15 years of academic work. She thought about the phone calls she'd need to make, to her parents, to her few close friends, to colleagues who'd become mentors over the years. She thought about starting over somewhere else, rebuilding a career that had been carefully constructed over more than a decade, but mostly she thought about Elena. Her phone buzzed with a text. "Can we meet? I heard Stone was in your office." Sarah typed back, "My apartment, 1 hour." Elena arrived looking pale and exhausted, as if she hadn't slept in days. She probably hadn't. The stress of the past 2 weeks had taken its toll on both of them. "They offered me a choice," Sarah said without preamble. "Resign quietly or face a formal investigation." Elena sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "God, Sarah, I'm so sorry. This is all my fault." "No," Sarah said firmly, sitting beside her. "It's not your fault. We both made choices. We both knew the risks. But I should have been stronger. I should have walked away before it got this far." Sarah reached for Elena's hands, pulling them away from her face. "Look at me," she said gently. "Do you regret what we had?" Elena's eyes were red with unshed tears. "How can I regret the best year of my life? But look what it's cost you." "The cost was always going to be there," Sarah said. "From the moment I realized I was falling in love with you, I knew this was possible. I made the choice to pursue this anyway." They sat in silence for a moment, holding hands in the familiar warmth of Sarah's apartment. Outside, snow continued to fall, and Sarah found herself memorizing this moment. The way Elena's hair caught the lamplight, the sound of her breathing, the weight of their intertwined fingers. "What will you do?" Elena asked finally. "I'm going to resign," Sarah said, and saying the words aloud made them real. "It's the best option for both of us. You get to finish your degree without any shadow hanging over your work, and I get to leave with my dignity intact. Where will you go?" Sarah had been thinking about that question for hours. "I'm not sure yet. Maybe back to California, near my family. There are community colleges there that might hire someone with my background. It won't be the same as university research, but it's still teaching." Elena was crying now, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. You're giving up everything you worked for me. Not for you, Sarah corrected. For us, for what we had. And Elena, it was worth it. Every moment was worth it. Elena leaned forward, resting her forehead against Sarah's. I love you so much, she whispered. I love you so much it terrifies me. I love you too, Sarah replied. That's why we have to do this right. What do you mean? Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she was about to say. After I resign, we can't contact each other, at least not until you graduate and move on to your PhD program. It has to be a clean break, Elena. If anyone discovers we're still in touch, it could ruin everything we're trying to protect. Elena pulled back, her eyes wide with shock. Sarah, no. We can't just... We have to, Sarah said, her voice breaking. If we keep seeing each other, even secretly, and someone finds out, they'll know the resignation was just damage control. They'll investigate anyway, and your academic future will be destroyed along with mine. Elena stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. So what? We just pretend we never existed? Pretend we never meant anything to each other? We'll always mean something to each other, Sarah said. But Elena, you have to finish your thesis. You have to get into Columbia or Yale or wherever you want to go for your PhD. You have to build the career you've dreamed of. And you can't do that if you're tied to this scandal. I don't care about my career if it means losing you. Yes, you do, Sarah said firmly. And I care about it too. Elena, you're brilliant. Your work matters. The world needs scholars like you, voices like yours. I won't let what happened between us rob the world of that. Elena turned back to face her, tears streaming down her face. How is this love? How can you say you love me and then ask me to walk away and never look back? Because sometimes love means letting go, Sarah said, standing and moving toward Elena. Because sometimes protecting someone you love means breaking your own heart. Elena collapsed against her then, sobbing into Sarah's shoulder. Sarah held her tightly, feeling Elena's body shake with grief, and knew that this moment would haunt her for the rest of her life. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other as if they could stop time through force of will. Finally, Elena pulled back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. If this is really goodbye, Elena said, her voice steady despite the tears, then I need to say something. Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. I want you to know that you changed my life, Elena said. Not just academically, though you made me a better scholar. You made me a better person. You taught me what it means to love someone completely, without reservation. You showed me what it feels like to be truly seen and understood. Sarah felt her own tears starting to fall. Elena. Let me finish, Elena said. I need you to know that no matter what happens next, no matter where we go or who we become, this year with you will always be the most real thing in my life. And I need you to promise me something, anything. Promise me you won't give up on love, Elena said. I know this is ending badly, and I know it probably feels like loving someone isn't worth the pain. But Sarah, what we had was beautiful. It was worth every risk we took. Promise me that someday, when you're ready, you'll open your heart again. Sarah couldn't speak past the lump in her throat, so she just nodded. Elena stepped back, creating distance between them. I should go, she said. If I stay any longer, I won't be able to leave. Elena, wait, Sarah said, her voice desperate. There's something I need you to know. Elena paused at the door, her hand on the handle. If they discover us, if somehow this all comes out despite everything we're doing to prevent it, I want you to know that I'll deny you, Sarah said, the words feeling like broken glass in her mouth. I'll deny that we ever had anything more than a professional relationship. I'll say you misunderstood my mentorship, that you developed feelings I never returned. I'll destroy my own reputation before I let them destroy yours. Elena's face crumpled with fresh pain. Sarah, you can't. I can and I will, Sarah interrupted. But Elena, I need you to know something else. Even if I have to deny you publicly, even if I have to pretend you never meant anything to me. I want you to know that I will never stop loving you. Not ever." Elena's hand trembled on the door handle. "The last thing she told me was, 'If they discover us, I'll deny you, but never stop loving you,'" she whispered, as if testing how the words would sound in the future, when this moment became memory. "Never stop loving you," Sarah repeated, and it sounded like both a promise and a prayer. Elena opened the door then, stepping out into the hallway without looking back. Sarah listened to her footsteps fade away, then closed the door and slid down against it, finally allowing herself to break completely. Outside, snow continued to fall on the university campus, where their love story had bloomed and died, covering their footprints and erasing the evidence of all the stolen moments that had made them feel alive. In a few months, Elena would graduate and move to New York for her PhD. Sarah would resign her position and drive west, toward a new life built on the ashes of the old one. But in that small apartment, surrounded by the ghost of what they'd shared, Sarah whispered into the empty air, "Never stop loving you. Never." And somewhere across town, Elena walked through the snow toward her own apartment, carrying those last words like a secret flame against the cold, knowing that whatever else happened in her life, she had been truly loved by someone extraordinary. Even if she could never say so aloud, the secret that had begun with stolen glances in a university library ended with a promise spoken in an empty room, words that would echo through both their lives long after the scandal faded and the world moved on. Love, they had learned, was not always about staying together. Sometimes it was about loving someone enough to let them go, to protect their dreams, even when it meant sacrificing your own. And sometimes that was the most beautiful love of all.